Please be seated. So what do you want to do with your life is the big question that we asked. And what do we think about that helps us answer that question? Does any children want to say, I want to be a football player? Does that sound like Ian? Sure, right? You could do a lot of different things, right, with your life. There's things that we might go, oh, I like playing football. Celeste, what's something that you might want to do? Maybe a writer? That would be a fun one, yeah? What if I told you need to be a writer? Have to be. Does that make you want to push away from it a little bit? A little bit. Something about other people telling us what to do gets us. It just kind of makes us not want to do it. The story that we read is a pretty hard story because it's pretty brutal, right? We have some brothers that don't seem to like each other to the point where one goes and kills 70 of them. It's a horrific story. And sometimes when I read through stories like this, I wonder, why would that be in the Bible? Why would that be in the Bible? And the reason why something like that is because the emotional weight that feeling carries, that horrific act, is something that we need to place in our emotions about what we think of what's being told in the story. Perhaps about this bramble bush. The bramble bush is the tree that the trees eventually ended up saying, yes, you come rule over us. And the bramble goes, all right, come dwell in my shade, no problems. All the other ones refused. And if this is a parable that Jotham is telling about his brother who just goes and kills all of the other ones, this nasty thorn bush needs to carry that really heavy representation. The choices that the people who are represented by those trees wanting a king, when those choices are the choices that a bramble would make as opposed to an olive tree or a fig tree or a grape, then maybe really bad things happen. So the trees, they want a king. And they come to the olive tree. Shh, this is a boxwood. I'm sorry, I didn't have an olive tree. It's as close as I could to the look. There's no olives on here, but we'll pretend. They come to the olive tree and say, olive tree, come rule over us. And the olive tree says, should I cease giving my oil that both God and people venerate me with to come sway over the trees? He's saying that in order for me to come lead you in the way that you want, I will have to stop giving my fruit. That's a weird thing to say. Okay, so they go, I don't want that. They didn't like it. So they go to the fig tree and they say, fig tree, come rule over us. And the fig tree says the same thing. He says, should I cease to give of my figs, my sweet fruit, in order to come rule over you? This will grow nice and big and be delicious. Should he stop doing that to be in charge of all of the other trees? They didn't want that either. So they come to the vine. Now this vine isn't a very happy vine. It's not a living vine. I had to cut this one out. I didn't have it in a pot. So it doesn't look as beautiful, but you can see our lovely grapes here. And the grapes, they come to him, and they say, will you come rule over us? And he says the same thing. Should I stop giving this wine, this fruit, and come rule over you? And then finally they go to the bramble. And they say, you come rule over us. Now, children who are listening, what's something pretty obviously different between this bush, or this tree and these trees? What's one thing that might be really different? Brambles don't have the fruit, okay. Would you want to touch the bramble? No, because this is full of thorns. It will hurt you to touch it. It doesn't really give us much either. It doesn't give us the fruits. Whereas these ones, you can touch them, right? They're soft. The leaves are soft. They aren't going to harm us. And they give us food. We have three things here that produce wonderful things that help people live. And then we have one here which just stabs us. At least for the sake of this story. This one's not doing very well. Barberries are beautiful, right? I like having them in my yard. They're a good change up in the landscape. But as a quality of how I want to act, do I want to be thorny and poke people and bother them and irritate them? Or do I want to love them from what the Lord teaches me? Am I willing to be obedient to the commandments to do that? Can I actually focus on another person's needs more than my own? Silly question here. Which is better of those three over there? Is an olive tree, a fig tree, or a vine better? Could we have different answers to that in our room? Anybody want to say, of those, I prefer figs? Which one's better? It's an interesting question. What jobs are better than other jobs? Do I get to say my job is the best because I work for the Lord? Is a trash man's job not as good? Is a painter not as good as a secretary or an assistant or a writer or a football player? Are any of those jobs better or worse? It's a weird question. Which number is better? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Anybody want to take a guess as which number is better? Anybody want to say which one's bigger? That's pretty obvious, right? We've got a bigger number, and we've got a smaller number. Sometimes we want to be number 1, but if it means we have less, we'd go, no, I'd want to be number 4, right? There's something in our heart that draws us towards more sometimes, unless it has to do with being number 1. But here's something I want to think about, especially if we equate these to different jobs in our world. Let's say that Ian is a number 4, and Celeste is a number 1. Should we say one's better than the other? One's better than 4? Celeste might agree with that. Or 4 is better than 1? A writer's better than a football player? Here's the trick. There's a number that if any of them are multiplied by, they will all become the same. 1 times infinity is infinity. 16 times infinity is infinity. 1 billion times infinity is infinity. What number, why would I pull up infinity? What might that represent in what we're talking about? What might that number? Infinity means every number. This is the Lord. If we were to give the Lord a number, it would be infinity. And so, here's the real equation. No matter what job we have, whether we think it's a 1 in our world or a 23 in our world, when we do it for the sake of the Lord, for the sake of His kingdom, for the sake of loving His people, and to obey His commandments, there is an infinite amount of love and wisdom that the Lord can put into you to do that job in miraculous ways. So, let's say I'm a number 2. I want to get better at my number 2 job, but I'm struggling at it. I don't know how. We might think about this parable and go, maybe I'm lacking something. Maybe it's not even the right answer. Maybe it's the motive. How much am I doing what I do because I love the Lord? This is what an olive tree represents, is the love that the Lord gives to us and the love that we receive from Him and the love that we push out from ourselves that comes from Him. That's what this olive tree represents. And so a person trying to get better at their job, going, if I do this because I love the Lord, it's going to get better. And it will. But what if we go, that doesn't seem right. How does being a trash man and loving the Lord go together? And we just forget that loving the Lord matters. We might go to this next step and go, at least I can be obedient. If it's not from love, I can obey the commandments while doing my work, because those commandments are from the Lord. And this is what the fig represents. It's taking those ideas that the Lord gives us from His love, and that's what becomes our commandments, and it's our willingness to obey them. In our parable, they go, no, I don't really want to obey the Lord either. I just want to do my job so that I'm the best, so that I make the most money, so that I have the most power. Next, they go, if I want to do it better, the Lord's word tells me I should do it in a way that loves and cares for my neighbor. That's what grapes represent, is all of the truths that lead us to know how to love our neighbor. But these people of Shechem said, no, don't really care about my neighbor here. All I really care about is protecting myself and having as much as I want, and being able to knock down anybody else that's coming up after me. Do we ever have that in our hearts instead of those things? Probably. Now, here's what makes this harder. A lot of the times, we don't know when we're dealing with the bramble, because it's in the shade. He says, come dwell in my shade. It's a state of not knowing what to do. In fact, I'd say most of us are living in a bramble state, and I would include myself in this. A bramble, we're told, represents spurious good. And spurious good is a kind of good that feels good. We could probably confirm that it's a right thing if we finagle the truths to make it fit. It might even be something where we're drawn to believe that this way of loving is loving when actually it's lacking real truth, and it could be really harmful. You might think of trying to care for somebody who is homeless. And let's just say that that homeless person is there for other reasons than they were down and out. Let's say that they had an addiction problem, and that's what their money is going to go to. Is it okay, is it good, really good, to give that person money knowing if you knew they were going to do something bad with it? We might want to say, well, the Lord says give to the poor. So on me, my part of this, I've done what's right. I've given. Does that feel like it's really good? Or do we actually have to think, what are the effects of these actions? What's beautiful about this parable is that it gives us tools to analyze our own motivations. Are we really looking towards the good of somebody else? Do we really want to be useful? Are we really willing to follow the Lord and love Him? It's hard to know that sometimes. No matter how good or strong your faith is, there are times where we really get to a place where we go, I just don't know whether I'm doing good or not. So these trees can also represent a process of evaluating our own motives. We're going to read a little bit of the Doctrine of Charity, number 54 to 60, and these are little bullet points. It says that genuine charity itself is prudent and wise. Otherwise, charity is spurious, because it is of the will or of good only, and not at the same time of the understanding or of truth. Now, a neighbor is somebody that we ought to love, and the neighbor that we ought to love from charity is spiritual good. Apart from this good, there is no charity. For the good of charity is spiritual good, since it is in accordance with that good. In the case of each one in the heavens, conjunction then is affected. So we have spiritual good, which is represented by that olive tree. The next one we're told is moral good. Moral good, which is human good itself, being the rational good according to which a person lives as a brother and companion, is the neighbor according to how much it derives from the spiritual good. And then finally, there is civil good. We have our fig tree. Civil good is the good of a life in accordance with all the civil laws, and its beginning and foundation, which is not to act against those laws, is on account of the penalties. If there is not moral good in this good and spiritual good within that, then it is none other than the animal good in which beasts are, when kept shut up or chained, towards those who feed and punish or care for them. Here's the key to this series of passages. Charity itself regards the good of a person's soul first and loves it as being that which is conjunction, by which conjunction is affected. Next, it regards his moral good and loves that insofar as he lives morally. And lastly, it regards the civil good, in accordance with which a person has his standing in the world. Through his civil good, a person is a person of the world. In accordance with his moral good, they are a person above the worldly person and lower than the heavenly. But in accordance with his spiritual good, he is a man of heaven or an angel. What this passage is saying is that if we're really in a bind, not knowing what we should do, not knowing the right answer of how do I care for somebody else or how should I live in this moment, we can go through and really think, when I'm interacting with somebody else, am I caring about their eternal well-being first? Am I caring about their soul first? Or is it just the natural stuff that I'm concerned about? Because if it's only the natural, and it doesn't have anything to do with their morality or their eternal life, then we're only giving them temporary things like money, fame, honor, happiness, serenity, not peace. How do we regard the soul of another person first? You know, a fig can't grow olives, and a grape isn't going to put out thorns. Each one of us has fruit, specific kind of fruit. There's an Allen fruit and a Celeste one and an Ian one. The Lord creates that fruit. And if we live as human beings, the human beings that we were created to be in the image and likeness of God, we will produce that fruit in its season, in process, when the time presents itself, when the opportunities are there. Sometimes when we feel like we have to make the right decision and it's right now, we go, there's no way I can make the right choice. Let's think about this. A tree will not have to go, oh, am I going to grow olives or figs today? Which one's the right one? It's just going to be a tree. A healthy tree produces fruit in its kind and in its season, just as a healthy person loves the Lord and loves their neighbor. This is what we were created to do, in the same way that these fruit trees were created to bear fruit. This is why the Lord says, go forth and bear fruit, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. The hard part is when we get caught up in what we think is good, what we feel is good because in this moment it feels good, or feels right, or I'm not going to get in trouble, so I'm just going to not do that thing. The bramble's a scary thing. Those feelings of, I like that, so I think I'm going to try to prove it's right. It's a dangerous thing. And that's why in this story it becomes such a brutal, terrible, sad story. Because when we allow our feelings to just dictate what we think is good or evil, right versus wrong, it's always going to favor me. But if we really look at the soul of another individual, looking at their spiritual good, their morality, and yes, their civility too, what things they might need in the natural world, what kinds of love can we give to another person that they might feel and be lifted up? What ideas have we learned in our lives and from the Lord's Word that we can share to help lift them up out of obscurity or give them a good answer or at least some comfort along the way? And what if there's a person who's really down and out? They might have a lot of love, they might have good ideas, and they could be doing a lot of good things, but they don't have the resources. Maybe that's a time where this offering the fig is really important. It's the resources to do the things that are spiritual and heavenly. Might sound silly to say that we can live like trees and that will lead us to heaven. But in many ways, this is the simplest way to think about our process. If we are created to be images and likenesses of the Lord, which means we are created to bear fruit of our own kind from the Lord, then there are times where we just want to sit back and live into that humanity. To really go, I'm going to bear fruit when it's the right time, as long as I'm focused on loving the Lord, being obedient to His Word, and looking at how I can serve others from that. It may not feel good in the moment. It may not seem right at the time. But in the long run, this is the way to heaven. To look at how do I love the Lord and love my neighbor. And somehow we'll be able to push out those feelings of resentment or harm or wanting what we want. And we'll be able to turn to the Lord and ask for what we wish, and it will be granted to us. I'd like to close with a passage from Arcana Celestia number 3796, and this is in your program. It says, regarding the ways that truth and good affect a person, the genuine affections for truth and good which are perceived by a person all have a divine origin, since they come from the Lord. However, as they come down from the Lord through heaven, they branch off into various and different streams where they form new origins for themselves. For as they flow into affections that are not genuine but spurious, and into affections for evil and falsity present within a person, so they become varied. Affections which often have a similar outward appearance to genuine ones present themselves, but these are nevertheless not genuine inwardly. The only way to establish their true identity is to discover the end they have in view. If that end is selfish or worldly, those affections are not genuine. But if the end is good, the good of the neighbor, the good of the community, the good of the country, and still more if it is the good of the church and the good of the Lord's kingdom, then they are genuine. For in that case, the Lord is their end, since the Lord is within those varieties of good. Amen. Please rise.